A millionaire forces his virgin daughter to marry his boss to protect his empire. But she, tired of being manipulated, turns the marriage into a strategic move to take what's rightfully hers. She uses her husband as a pawn in her game, while uncovering her father's empire's secrets. If this story got you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Eleanor Blackwood stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror of her Manhattan penthouse bedroom. The woman looking back at her was the epitome of perfection, poised, elegant, with intelligent green eyes that could charm even the most hardened of businessmen. Her auburn hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, framing a face that had graced the covers of countless society magazines. But behind those captivating eyes lay a storm brewing. A storm her father, Richard Blackwood, was too blind to see. "The Patterson Gala begins at 8, Eleanor. I expect you to be on your best behavior," Richard's voice echoed through the intercom system that connected every room in their luxury penthouse. "The Patterson's son will be attending, and I want you to make an impression." Eleanor pressed the button on her vanity. "Of course, father. I'm almost ready." Her voice was sweet, accommodating, the perfect daughter. She released the button and watched her smile fade into a cold, calculating stare. Richard Blackwood had built the Blackwood financial empire from nothing, transforming himself from a poor Brooklyn boy into one of New York's most powerful men. He liked to remind Eleanor of his humble beginnings whenever she questioned his methods. "I wasn't born with a silver spoon like you," he would say. "Everything I built with my own hands." What he never mentioned was how many people he had stepped on to reach the top, or how he viewed his own daughter as merely another asset in his vast portfolio. The buzzing of her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was a message from her father's assistant. "Mr. Blackwood requests you join him in his study before leaving for the gala." Eleanor took a deep breath and stood up, smoothing down the emerald silk dress that hugged her figure perfectly. She had been selected by her father's personal stylist, of course. Richard Blackwood left nothing to chance, especially not his daughter's appearance at social events where business connections could be made. The walk to her father's study felt longer than usual. Each step on the marble floor echoed through the quiet hallway adorned with priceless art, investments, not passion pieces. Everything in Richard Blackwood's life was calculated for maximum return. "Come in," Richard's voice commanded before she could even knock. He always seemed to know when she was approaching. Eleanor entered the study, a room designed to intimidate with its towering bookshelves and massive mahogany desk that made visitors feel small and insignificant. Richard didn't look up from his papers as she entered, making her wait, a power move he used on everyone, including his own daughter. "Eleanor," he finally acknowledged, setting down his fountain pen. At 58, Richard Blackwood was still a handsome man with salt and pepper, hair and piercing blue eyes that had brokered billion-dollar deals. "You look acceptable." Coming from him, this was high praise. "Thank you, father," Eleanor replied, taking a seat without waiting for his invitation, a small act of rebellion that didn't go unnoticed. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly before he continued. "I've been meaning to discuss something important with you." He pushed a folder across the desk. "Open it." Inside was a dossier on a man named Alexander Hayes, complete with financial statements, business holdings, and even personal information. A candid photo showed a man in his early 30s with dark, intense eyes and a confident smile that didn't quite reach them. "Alexander Hayes," Richard explained, watching her reaction closely, "CEO of Hayes Innovation Technologies. His company has developed a revolutionary financial algorithm that could transform how Wall Street operates. I need access to that technology." Eleanor flipped through the pages, understanding immediately where this conversation was heading. "And what do you need from me, father?" "He's single, ambitious, and from what I've gathered, quite taken with your charity work." Richard's smile was cold. "He'll be at the Patterson Gala tonight. I want you to charm him." "You want me to seduce him for business," Eleanor stated flatly. "I want you to secure our family's future," Richard corrected, his tone hardening. "The market is changing, Eleanor. We're facing pressures from all sides. Hayes's technology could give us the edge we need." What Richard wasn't saying But Eleanor knew from her own discreet investigations into her father's business dealings was that Blackwood Financial was in trouble. Richard had made several high-risk investments that were failing, and competitors were circling like sharks, sensing weakness. "And if I refuse?" she asked, knowing the answer. Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You won't. You understand what's at stake, the lifestyle you enjoy, the charitable foundation you're so proud of. All of it depends on our company's success." Money paused. "Besides, Hayes is exactly the kind of man I would choose for you anyway. Young, brilliant, with a promising future. Consider this my blessing on a potential match." Eleanor felt her stomach turn, but kept her face composed. "You're arranging my marriage." "I'm creating an opportunity," Richard countered. "What you do with it is up to you, though I expect you to act in the family's best interest." He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "The car will be ready in 20 minutes. After leaving her father's study, Eleanor retreated to her private bathroom, one of the few places without surveillance. She gripped the marble countertop until her knuckles turned white, staring at her reflection once more. The perfect daughter, the perfect pawn. Something inside her snapped. If her father wanted to use her as a chess piece, she would play the game, but by her own rules. She would meet Alexander Hayes, yes. She would charm him, yes. But not for her father's benefit. It was time to take control of her own destiny. The Patterson Gala was a glittering affair held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. New York's elite mingled among ancient artifacts and priceless paintings, discussing business deals and social gossip with equal enthusiasm. Eleanor moved through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries and deflecting unwanted advances from the sons of her father's associates. Her eyes scanned the room, finally landing on her target. Alexander Hayes stood near a Greek statue, looking bored as an older businessman talked animatedly at him. Up close, he was more handsome than his photo suggested, tall and athletic, with an intensity that set him apart from the trust fund playboys that normally populated these events. As if sensing her gaze, Alex looked up and their eyes met across the crowded room. Eleanor gave him a small, mysterious smile before turning away, moving toward the terrace. The hook was baited, now to see if he would bite. She didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, she felt a presence beside her. "You must be Eleanor Blackwood," Alexander said, his voice deeper than she had expected. "I've seen your photo in the society pages, though they don't do you justice." Eleanor turned, allowing a hint of surprise to cross her features. "And you must be Alexander Hayes. My father has mentioned your work. It sounds fascinating." "Call me Alex," he replied with a smile that seemed genuine. "And I'd much rather hear about your work with the Blackwood Foundation than talk about financial algorithms at a party." Something in his manner caught Eleanor off guard. He wasn't at all what she expected. There was an authenticity to him that was rare in her world of calculated social interactions. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to respond naturally. "It's the only part of my life that feels truly mine," she admitted, then immediately regretted the honesty. Alex studied her, face seeming to look beyond the perfect exterior. "I know something about living up to impossible expectations. My father was a professor at MIT, a genius who expected me to follow in his footsteps. It took me years to realize I could forge my own path while still honoring his legacy." The conversation flowed easily after that, moving from philanthropy to technology to art. Eleanor found herself genuinely engaged, almost forgetting her purpose until she spotted her father watching them from across the room, a satisfied smile on his face. The sight was like a bucket of cold water. Richard thought his plan was working perfectly, his daughter, the obedient pawn, seducing the strategic alliance he needed. Little did he know that Eleanor was formulating a plan of her own, one that would use his own tactics against him. As the evening drew to a close, Alex asked for her number. "I'd like to see you again," he said, his eyes sincere. "Perhaps somewhere, less crowded, where we can actually hear each other talk." Eleanor smiled, accepting his business card while offering her private number in return. "I'd like that," she said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Alex Hayes might have been chosen by her father as her future husband, but he would be her choice as an ally in the war she was about to wage against Richard Blackwood. The irony was not lost on her. The very man her father had selected might become the instrument of his downfall. As the town car carried her and her silent father back to their penthouse, Eleanor gazed out at the glittering New York skyline. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose, of control. If her father wanted to treat her like a piece in his game, he would soon learn that she had been practicing moves he couldn't even imagine. The game was just beginning, and Eleanor Blackwood intended to win. The following weeks unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance. Eleanor met Alexander Hayes for lunches in trendy Soho restaurants, for walks along the High Line, and for private viewings at galleries in Chelsea. Each encounter was strategic, with Eleanor revealing just enough vulnerability to draw him in while gathering crucial information about both his technology and his character. To her surprise, she found herself genuinely enjoying his company. Unlike most men in her father's circle, Alex wasn't merely interested in her beauty or the Blackwood name. He asked questions about her foundation's work with underprivileged girls, listened to her ideas, and challenged her thinking in ways that made her feel respected rather than diminished. "You never talk about your mother," Alex noted one evening. As they sat on the rooftop terrace of his Tribeca loft, the Manhattan skyline twinkling around them like fallen stars. Eleanor tensed slightly, her hand pausing around the stem of her wine glass. "She left when I was very young. I barely remember her." What she didn't say was that Vivian Blackwood had fled from Richard's controlling grasp when Eleanor was just 5 years old. She'd tried to take Eleanor with her, but Richard's influence and legal team had ensured that never happened. The custody battle had been brief and devastating, ending with Vivian being branded unstable and unfit. Eleanor had received birthday cards for a few years afterward, until they suddenly stopped. Richard had told her that her mother had started a new family and forgotten about her, but Eleanor had always suspected a darker truth. "I'm sorry," Alex said, his eyes softening. "That must have been difficult, growing up with just your father." "Richard Blackwood is a complicated man," Eleanor replied carefully. "He taught me everything I know about business, about how the world really works." She met Alex's gaze. "He believes that emotions are weaknesses to be exploited." "And what do you believe?" Alex asked, reaching across the table to touch her. And the unexpected tenderness of the gesture caught Eleanor off guard. For a brief moment she let her mask slip. "I believe that some lessons come at too high a price." Alex studied her face, seeming to sense the depth beneath her carefully constructed facade. "You know, when we first met, I thought you were just another trust fund princess playing at philanthropy to ease a guilty conscience." He smiled softly. "I was wrong." Eleanor withdrew her hand, feeling suddenly exposed. "Perhaps you were right the first time. Perhaps this is all a game." "If it is," Alex replied unperturbed, "then you're playing for higher stakes than most." His perceptiveness was unnerving. Eleanor changed the subject, steering the conversation toward his work, the algorithm that had caught her father's attention. To her surprise, Alex spoke openly about it. "The financial world is changing," he explained, his eyes lighting up with genuine passion. "My technology doesn't just predict market movements, it anticipates human behavior, recognizes patterns, invisible to even the most experienced traders." "Sounds like the perfect weapon," Eleanor observed. Alex frowned slightly. "I don't see it as a weapon. It's a tool that could democratize finance, level the playing field." "Is that why you haven't sold it to the highest bidder? My father would pay handsomely for that kind of advantage." "Some things aren't for sale," Alex said simply. "Though your father's representatives have certainly tried to convince me otherwise." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Representatives?" "William Stern has approached me 3 times in the last month," Alex said, naming her father's most trusted lieutenant. "Increasingly generous offers, increasingly thinly veiled threats." This was new information. Her father hadn't mentioned that he'd already tried and failed to acquire Alex's technology through his usual methods. It explained why he had resorted to using Eleanor as bait. "And now he's sent you," Alex continued, watching her reaction carefully. A more personal approach. The accusation hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt a flash of anger, not at Alex for his suspicion, but at her father for putting her in this position, for making even genuine connections seem calculated and false. Is that what you think? That I'm my father's ambassador? She stood up, gathering her purse. Alex caught her wrist gently. I think you're someone caught in a complexity of loyalties and motivations that even you might not fully understand. His eyes met hers. I think there's more to Eleanor Blackwood than anyone, including your father, truly knows. The perceptiveness of his assessment was so accurate, it left her momentarily speechless. Alex released her wrist and stepped back, giving her space. I should go, she said finally. Eleanor, Alex called as she reached the door. Whatever game you're playing, just be careful. Your father isn't known for his forgiveness when people defy him. She paused, her back still turned. I'm well aware of who my father is. Are you? Alex asked quietly. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're walking a very dangerous line. Eleanor turned, her composure regained. Perhaps danger is exactly what I'm looking for. With that enigmatic statement, she left, her mind racing with new possibilities. The next morning, Eleanor sat in her private office at the Blackwood Foundation, ostensibly reviewing grant proposals, but actually processing everything she had learned from Alex. Her father's failed attempts to acquire the technology through traditional means changed her understanding of the situation. Richard was more desperate than she had realized, which gave her leverage she hadn't anticipated. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Your father is here to see you, Miss Blackwood. Eleanor took a deep breath, composing her features into a neutral expression. Send him in. Richard Blackwood entered like he owned the place, which technically he did, as the Foundation's primary benefactor. He surveyed the modest office with thinly veiled disdain. He had never understood her desire to work here, rather than at Blackwood Financial's gleaming headquarters. I trust your little romance is progressing well, Richard said without preamble, taking a seat across from her desk. Eleanor maintained her calm. Alex and I enjoy each other's company. That's not what I asked, Richard's voice hardened. Williams tells me Hayes has been declining meetings with our legal team. I need you to accelerate your influence. These things take time, Father. Alex isn't easily manipulated. Everyone has a price, Eleanor. Find his. Richard leaned forward. The situation has become more urgent. We need to announce a merger with Hayes Innovation Technologies within the next 3 months. Eleanor's pulse quickened. 3 months. That's impossibly fast for a corporate merger, especially with a reluctant party. Which is why we're pursuing an alternative approach. Richard's smile was cold. Marriage creates certain legal advantages when it comes to intellectual property. As Hayes's wife, you would have access that no corporate spy could achieve. The calculated cruelty of it, to use not just her body and charm, but the sacred institution of marriage as a business tactic, momentarily stole Eleanor's breath. How you expect me to propose to him? She asked, unable to keep the sarcasm from her voice. Don't be ridiculous, he'll propose to you. Richard stood up. I've arranged for you both to be featured in next month's Business Innovators profile. The brilliant tech wunderkind and the humanitarian heiress, a modern power couple. The publicity will create certain expectations. Eleanor felt sick but kept her expression neutral. And if I refuse? Richard's expression hardened. The Foundation receives its annual endowment next quarter. It would be unfortunate if financial constraints forced you to scale back your precious programs. He paused at the door. Dinner at the penthouse tomorrow night. Bring Hayes, it's time I got to know my future son-in-law. After he left, Eleanor sat motionless, her mind racing. Her father had just accelerated the timeline, forcing her to adjust her own plans. She had been playing a long game, gradually gaining Alex's trust while quietly gathering information about her father's business vulnerabilities. Now she needed to move faster, take greater risks. She picked up her phone and called a number few people knew she had. It's me, she said when the line connected. I need everything you have on William Stern, especially his overseas accounts, and I want to know who else is circling Blackwood Financial right now. My father's desperate enough to sell his own daughter. There must be sharks in the water I can feed." The voice on the other end, belonging to a former Blackwood financial employee whom Richard had ruined over a minor transgression, promised to deliver the information within 24 hours. Next, Eleanor called Alex. "Dinner at my father's tomorrow night," she said without greeting. "He's eager to meet you." "That sounds ominous," Alex replied, only half joking. "It is," Eleanor confirmed. "My father never does anything without multiple motives." "Including having his daughter date me?" Alex asked pointedly. Eleanor paused, then decided on a half-truth. "He wants your technology, Alex. He thinks I'm his path to getting it." "And what do you want, Eleanor?" The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. What did she want? Revenge against her father, yes. Control of her own life, absolutely. But as for Alex Hayes, the lines were becoming dangerously blurred. "I want to see how the game plays out," she answered finally. Alex was quiet for a moment. "I'll pick you up at 7, he said at last. "Where?" "Something armor-plated. I have a feeling we're both going to need protection." After hanging up, Eleanor walked to the window of her office, looking out at the sprawling city below. She had set events in motion that couldn't easily be stopped, playing a dangerous game with her father, with Alex, and perhaps most dangerously with her own heart. Tomorrow night would bring her face to face with both men in an arena her father believed he controlled. But Richard Blackwood had underestimated his daughter. He had raised her to be the perfect pawn, but failed to realize he had actually created a queen, the most powerful piece on the chessboard, capable of movements he couldn't anticipate. As she watched the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the city they both sought to control, Eleanor made a silent vow. By the time this game ended, her father would understand exactly what he had created, and it would be the last lesson he ever taught her. The Blackwood penthouse always felt colder to Eleanor than the actual temperature warranted. Perhaps it was the minimalist decor, all chrome, glass, and white marble, or perhaps it was the emotional frigidity that had defined her upbringing within these walls. Tonight, as she prepared for dinner with her father and Alex, the chill seemed particularly acute. Her phone chimed with an encrypted message from her contact, a detailed file on William Stern, her father's right-hand man. The information confirmed her suspicions. Stern had been siphoning funds from Blackwood Investments for years, small amounts that added up to millions, carefully hidden in accounts throughout the Cayman Islands. The true revelation, however, was that Richard knew about it and was allowing it to continue. Eleanor realized her father was keeping the evidence as insurance, a way to control Stern should he ever step out of line. It was exactly the kind of manipulation Richard had taught her. Always have leverage over those closest to you. The irony that she was now using this same lesson against him wasn't lost on Eleanor. A second message arrived with a list of companies quietly accumulating Blackwood financial stock. One name stood out: Phoenix Capital, run by Victoria Chen, one of the few people who had ever bested Richard Blackwood in a business deal. If Victoria was buying Blackwood stock, she smelled blood in the water. Eleanor smiled, saving Victoria's contact information. A potential ally, perhaps, in the war to come. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. Eleanor took a final look in the mirror. Her black evening dress was elegant but understated, her makeup flawless. The perfect daughter preparing to perform her role one more time. Alex stood in the hallway, his dark suit tailored to perfection, holding a bottle of 25-year-old Macallan, her father's preferred scotch. The gesture showed research, attention to detail. He was playing the game too, though his motives remained unclear to her. "You look stunning," he said, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. "You clean up nicely yourself," she replied, with a small smile. "Ready to enter the lion's den?" "Are you?" he countered, offering his arm. It was a fair question. Despite her preparations, Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness. This dinner would set her plan in motion, with no possibility of retreat. Richard was waiting for them in the penthouse's grand living room, standing before floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering Manhattan skyline, a backdrop He had carefully chosen to emphasize his power and success. "Alexander Hayes," Richard greeted, extending his hand. "I've been looking forward to meeting the man who's captured my daughter's attention." "Mr. Blackwood," Alex replied, his grip firm as they shook hands. "Thank you for the invitation." Richard's gaze was calculating as he accepted the scotch. "A man who knows his whiskey. I approve already." Eleanor watched the interaction with practiced detachment, noting how both men took each other's measure. Two alpha wolves circling cautiously, each assessing the other's strengths and weaknesses. "Eleanor tells me you declined William Stern's offers," Richard said as they moved to the dining room. "3 times, I believe." Alex met Richard's gaze, steadily. "I built Hayes Technologies to change the financial world, not to give one player an insurmountable advantage." "Admirable principles," Richard commented, though his tone suggested he found them foolish rather than praiseworthy. But uncertainty was a luxury she couldn't afford, not now, when all the pieces were finally moving into position. Eleanor had spent years preparing for this moment, gathering allies, collecting information, identifying her father's vulnerabilities. She walked to her bedroom window, looking out at the city that her father had always seen as his personal kingdom. Soon, very soon, the king would fall, and the princess he had underestimated would claim the throne. As she prepared for bed, Eleanor's phone chimed with a message from Alex. "Whatever game we're playing, I'm in. But remember, I have moves of my own." A smile curved Eleanor's lips as she read his words. Alex Hayes was proving to be far more interesting and potentially dangerous than she had anticipated. Perhaps in him, she had finally found a worthy opponent, or, more intriguing still, a true partner. Principles don't build empires. "Perhaps I'm not interested in building an empire," Alex replied. Richard laughed, a sound devoid of genuine humor. "Everyone wants an empire, Mr. Hayes. They just call it by different names. Legacy, impact, change. It all requires the same thing: power." Eleanor observed the verbal sparring as their private chef served the first course. Her father was testing Alex, looking for pressure points, vulnerabilities he could exploit. But Alex was holding his own, neither intimidated nor overly impressed by Richard Blackwood's legendary status. "Tell me about your parents," Richard said abruptly. "Your father was at MIT, I understand." It was a calculated question. Richard would have thoroughly researched Alex's background before this dinner. "He was," Alex confirmed, "theoretical physics. He died 3 years ago." "And your mother?" "Left when I was young. She couldn't handle my father's obsession with his work." Alex's eyes briefly flickered to Eleanor. Some people aren't built for the sacrifices that ambition demands of a family. Eleanor saw her father's satisfied smile. He believed he'd identified a weakness, a parallel between Alex's childhood and the narrative he'd crafted about Eleanor's mother. "Indeed," Richard agreed, "weakness of character often disguises itself as moral objection." The conversation continued in this vein through dinner, with Richard probing for information while revealing nothing of consequence himself. Eleanor spoke when expected to, playing her role as the dutiful daughter, while watching every nuance of the interaction. After dinner, Richard suggested the men share a drink in his study, a transparent attempt to separate them. Eleanor knew the routine. Her father would make his real pitch without her presence, man to man, as though she were merely a prize to be negotiated over rather than an autonomous person. "Actually," Eleanor interjected smoothly, "I thought we might show Alex the rooftop garden. The night view is spectacular." Richard's momentary displeasure flashed across his face before his mask of geniality returned. "Of course, business can wait for another time." As Eleanor led Alex toward the private elevator to the rooftop, she felt her father's eyes boring into her back. She had deviated from the script, a small act of defiance that would not go unnoticed or unpunished. The rooftop garden was Eleanor's design, a lush, secluded oasis, 30 stories above Manhattan, with carefully selected plants that thrived in the harsh urban environment. Unlike the sterile interior of the penthouse, this space had personality, warmth, life. "Your father is exactly as advertised," Alex commented as they walked among the fragrant herbs and flowering shrubs, intimidating, calculating, and utterly convinced of his own invincibility. An accurate assessment, Eleanor agreed. What did you think of his performance? Performance. Alex raised an eyebrow. The benevolent patriarch, the self-made man sharing his wisdom, it's all carefully crafted. She stopped beside a small fountain, its gentle bubbling providing cover for their conversation in case her father had listening devices installed even here. He wants your technology badly enough to offer his only daughter as the incentive package. Alex's expression darkened. And you're willing to be used that way? I'm willing to let him think I am, Eleanor replied, meeting his gaze directly. My father sees people as instruments to achieve his goals. He raised me to be his perfect creation, beautiful, intelligent, and utterly loyal. She paused, but he made a critical error. Which was? He taught me too well. Eleanor moved closer, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. My father's company is in trouble, Alex. Serious trouble. He's over-leveraged. He's made enemies. Solved the wrong people, and now he's desperate. Alex studied her face. And you're telling me this because I want you to know what you're really being pulled into. This isn't just about you and me, or even about your technology. It's about the future of Blackwood Financial, about my father's legacy, and about my freedom. Your freedom, Alex repeated. Is that what you're after? Eleanor looked out over the city lights, choosing her words carefully. When I was 12, I found a box of my mother's things hidden in a storage room, things my father claimed had been lost. There were letters she'd written to me that I never received, court documents showing how my father had used his influence to destroy her credibility, to brand her unfit. She turned back to Alex. That was when I understood what Richard Blackwood was capable of doing, to maintain control. So this is about revenge, Alex said quietly. It's about justice, Eleanor corrected him. And yes, about taking control of my own life. My father wants your technology to save his empire. I want... She hesitated. What do you want, Eleanor? Alex pressed, stepping closer until they were inches apart. The question hung between them, laden with implications. What did she want? Revenge, certainly. Freedom, absolutely. But as she looked into Alex's eyes, she recognized something else she wanted. Something that complicated her carefully constructed plans. I want to stop playing. A role, she finally answered. With you, at least. Alex reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The tenderness of the gesture made her breath catch. How do I know this isn't just another performance? It was a fair question, one she had anticipated. Instead of answering with words, Eleanor closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened with an intensity that surprised them both. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Eleanor felt a disorienting mix of emotions. This hadn't been part of her plan, this genuine connection. That, she said softly, wasn't for my father's benefit. Alex's expression was unreadable. You're playing a dangerous game, Eleanor. I know exactly how dangerous, she replied. The question is, are you willing to play it with me? Before he could answer, the elevator chimed, announcing someone's arrival. Eleanor stepped back just as Richard emerged onto the rooftop. Enjoying the view? Richard asked, his tone pleasant, but his eyes sharp as they took in the slight flush on Eleanor's cheeks, the proximity of the two. It's breathtaking, Alex replied, his composure perfect. Eleanor has always had excellent taste, Richard commented. In gardens and it seems in men. He turned to his daughter. William needs to discuss the Carlyle account with me. Perhaps you could show Alex out. It was a dismissal, thinly veiled. Eleanor nodded, recognizing the signs of her father's impatience. Of course, as they descended in the elevator, the tension between them was palpable. He's going to offer you something, Eleanor said quietly. Money, partnerships, board positions, whatever he thinks will tempt you. When he does, I need you to accept, Alex. Looked at her in surprise. You want me to accept his offer? I want you to appear to accept it, she clarified. There's something bigger at play here, Alex. Trust me on this. The elevator reached the main floor, and they walked in silence to the private entrance where Alex's car waited. "Why should I trust you?" Alex asked finally, turning to face her. "You've admitted you're playing a game. How do I know I'm not just another piece on your board?" Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. "You don't. That's the risk you have to decide if you're willing to take." Alex studied her face for a long moment. "I'll consider it," he said finally. Before leaving, he leaned in and kissed her again, briefly, but with enough intensity to leave her momentarily breathless. "But I play by my own rules, Eleanor. Remember that." As his car pulled away, Eleanor touched her lips, still feeling the pressure of his kiss. This unexpected emotional complication was dangerous for her plans and for her heart. But perhaps it could also be leveraged. After all, her father had taught her to use every available resource in pursuit of victory. Upstairs, Richard was waiting for her in the living room, a glass of the scotch Alex had brought in his hand. "He's intelligent," Richard acknowledged, "and more principled than I expected. We can use that." "Use it how?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Richard smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "There are many forms of pressure, Eleanor. Hayes cares about you, that much is obvious. If he believes you're as invested in him as he is in you, he'll be more amenable to cooperation." "You want me to manipulate his feelings for me," Eleanor stated flatly. "I want you to secure our family's future," Richard countered, "by any means necessary." Eleanor recognized her own words from earlier being used against her. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so high. "I understand," she said, her voice neutral. Richard nodded, satisfied. "Good. William is arranging a meeting with Hayes next week to discuss potential collaboration. In the meantime, deepen the connection. Make him believe you're falling in love." What Richard couldn't know, was that Eleanor had already taken steps to ensure that meeting would expose certain uncomfortable truths about Blackwood Financial's precarious position. The information would come from apparently unrelated sources, making Alex wary of any partnership without seeming like a direct betrayal from Eleanor. "I'll do what needs to be done," she promised, the double meaning of her words hidden beneath her daughter's apparent submission. As she walked to her private suite, Eleanor felt the weight of the multiple games she was playing, with her father, with Alex, perhaps even with herself. The lines between strategy and genuine feeling were blurring dangerously, and for the first time since she had begun planning her father's downfall, Eleanor felt uncertain of her path forward. But 3 weeks later, Eleanor sat in the back of a town car, reviewing the quarterly reports for Blackwood Financial that her insider at the company had smuggled to her. The numbers confirmed what she already suspected. Her father's empire was teetering on the edge of collapse. A series of bad investments, combined with the withdrawal of several major clients, had left Blackwood Financial dangerously exposed. Richard was using increasingly desperate measures to maintain the appearance of stability, including moving funds between accounts in ways that skirted the edges of legality. The most damning document, however, was evidence that Richard had been systematically falsifying reports to shareholders for the past 2 years, painting a picture of prosperity while the company hemorrhaged money. It was the kind of revelation that could not only destroy Blackwood Financial, but could send Richard Blackwood to prison. Eleanor had been gathering these breadcrumbs of evidence for months, preparing for the perfect moment to use them. That moment was rapidly approaching. Her phone rang, Alex's name appearing on the screen. "The meeting with your father's team just ended," he said without preamble when she answered. "And?" Eleanor prompted, though she already knew what had happened. She had arranged for Victoria Chen to reach out to Alex just before the meeting, sharing certain concerning information about Blackwood Financial's practices. "And I'm beginning to understand the game you're playing," Alex replied, his voice low. "The information Victoria Chen shared with me was that you're doing." Eleanor smiled to herself. "Let's just say Victoria and I have discovered some mutual interests. This goes beyond taking control of your life, Eleanor. You're systematically dismantling your father's company." "I'm exposing the truth," she corrected him. "My father built his empire on lies, manipulation, and the pain of others. It's time for that empire to fall. There was a pause, and Eleanor could almost see Alex processing this information, recalibrating his understanding of her motivations. William Stern offered me a partnership agreement that would effectively give Blackwood financial control of my algorithm, Alex finally said, in exchange for a significant stake in the company and his blessing regarding our relationship. Eleanor felt a twist of disgust. And what did you tell him? I told him I needed time to review the proposal with my legal team, Alex replied, but what I really need is to see you, tonight. There was something in his voice, an intensity that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Was he angry about her manipulation, impressed by her strategy, or merely concerned about being caught in the crossfire of her war with her father? My place, she decided, 8 o'clock. After hanging up, Eleanor directed her driver to take her to the offices of the Blackwood Foundation. She had appearances to maintain, a role to play for just a little while longer. Throughout the afternoon, as she reviewed grant proposals and met with her team, Eleanor's mind kept returning to Alex. Their relationship had evolved rapidly over the past weeks, becoming something more complex than either of them had initially intended. What had begun as mutual manipulation had developed layers of genuine connection that complicated her carefully laid plans. When Alex had kissed her on her father's rooftop garden, something had changed. Subsequent dinners, late-night conversations, and increasingly intimate moments had created a bond that went beyond strategic alliance. Eleanor found herself sharing truths she had never spoken aloud about her childhood, her mother, the years of emotional manipulation at her father's hands. And Alex had reciprocated with his own vulnerabilities, his complicated relationship with his father's legacy, his fears about the potential misuse of his technology. The irony wasn't lost on her, that in the midst of orchestrating her father's downfall, she had found something genuine with the very man Richard had selected as her future husband. It was a complication she hadn't prepared for, and Eleanor. Blackwood was not accustomed to being unprepared. At 7:30, Eleanor arrived at her Chelsea loft, a space she had purchased with her own money, earned from investments made outside her father's purview. Unlike the cold, sterile penthouse where she had grown up, this place reflected her true tastes. Warm woods, rich colors, walls lined with books and art selected for beauty rather than investment value. It was the one place where she didn't feel the weight of her father's expectations, the one place where she could truly be herself. Alex arrived precisely at 8, his expression serious as she welcomed him inside. He declined her offer of wine, instead pacing her living room with restless energy. "Victoria Chen is planning a hostile takeover of Blackwood Financial," he said without preamble. "She's been quietly accumulating stock for months, and now she's approaching key investors with evidence of irregularities in the company's accounting." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "I know." Alex stopped pacing, turning to face her directly. "You're working with her." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "Victoria and I have a mutually beneficial arrangement. She gets the company. She's wanted for years, and I get revenge," Alex finished for her. "Justice," Eleanor corrected. "My father leveraged his power to take everything from my mother, her reputation, her child, her future. He's done the same to countless others who stood in his way, including me." Alex's eyes searched hers. "Was I just another piece in your game, Eleanor? A convenient ally in your vendetta against your father?" The question struck at the heart of the complication that had been troubling Eleanor for weeks. What had begun as strategic manipulation had become something far more complex. At first, yes, she admitted, deciding that honesty was the only path forward. "My father chose you as my future husband because he wanted your technology. I chose you as an ally because I needed someone he couldn't control." "And now?" Alex pressed, moving closer. Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. "Now I don't know where the strategy ends and the truth begins, and that terrifies me." Alex reached out, his fingers lightly tracing the line of her jaw. "It terrifies me too," he confessed. "I came into this with my eyes open. I knew Richard Blackwood was trying to use you to get to me. I thought I could play the game, protect my work, and maybe—" He hesitated. "Maybe what?" Eleanor prompted. "Maybe save you in the process," he finished quietly. "But you didn't need saving, did you? You were 10 steps ahead all along." Eleanor felt a flash of anger. "I don't need a savior, Alex. I need a partner, someone who sees me as an equal, not as a prize to be won or a damsel to be rescued." "A partner," Alex repeated, a smile slowly forming. "Is that what we are, Eleanor? Partners?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the current situation. Eleanor knew they had reached a critical moment, not just in their strategy against her father, but in whatever was developing between them. "I want us to be," she admitted, the vulnerability of the confession making her voice softer than usual. "But first, I need to know if you can handle what comes next." "Tell me," Alex said simply. Eleanor moved to her desk, retrieving a folder which she handed to him. "This is my endgame. 3 days from now, at the Blackwood Financial Shareholders Meeting, Victoria Chen will make her move. Simultaneously, these documents will be delivered to the SEC, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and select journalists." Alex opened the folder, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. Irrefutable evidence of Richard Blackwood's financial crimes, tax evasion, and corporate espionage activities spanning decades. "This will destroy him," Alex said quietly. "Not just his company, but his reputation, his freedom, everything." "Yes," Eleanor acknowledged, "it will." "And you're prepared for the consequences? Once this is set in motion, there's no going back. The scandal will touch you too. The Blackwood name will be tainted." Eleanor had considered this carefully. The foundation has already been legally separated from Blackwood Financial. Its funding has been secured through an independent trust. As for the Blackwood name, she shrugged. Names can be changed. Alex closed the folder, setting it aside. To take her hands in his. "What do you need from me?" It was this, his direct approach, his willingness to ask what she needed rather than tell her what to do, that had first drawn Eleanor to Alex, beyond the strategic value of their alliance. "My father has invited us to dinner tomorrow night," she explained. "He'll make his final pitch for your technology, likely with threats thinly disguised as business advice. I need you to appear receptive, to give him hope that his plan is working." She paused. "And then at the shareholders' meeting, I need you to stand with me when everything comes crashing down." Alex studied her face. "And after, when your father's empire has fallen and your revenge is complete, what then?" It was the question Eleanor had been avoiding asking herself. For so long, her life had been defined by her father's control, and then by her determination to break free from it. What would define her once that battle was won? "I don't know," she admitted. "For the first time in my life, I'll be truly free to decide my own path." Alex's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "And might I have a place on that path?" The vulnerability in his question matched her own, creating a moment of perfect balance between them. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling, a defense mechanism failing. She had planned for every contingency in her war against her father, except this. Falling in love with the man who was supposed to be merely a tactical alliance. "I want you to," she whispered, the admission feeling like both surrender and victory. Alex drew her closer, his kiss tender at first, then deepening with an intensity that spoke of more than strategic partnership. Eleanor allowed herself to be swept away by it, by him, by the unexpected emotional complication that had become the most genuine thing in her carefully constructed life. Later that night, as they lay tangled in her sheets, Alex asked the question she had been expecting since showing him the evidence against her father. "How long have you been planning this?" Eleanor traced patterns on his chest, considering her answer. "Since I was 16, she said finally. "That was when I found the trust documents my father had hidden, proof that my mother hadn't abandoned me as he'd claimed. He'd threatened to destroy her if she ever tried to contact me again." Alex's arm tightened around her. 12 years of planning your father's downfall. That's impressively patient. "Revenge is a dish best served cold," Eleanor quoted with a small smile. "Though it's become more complicated than I expected. Because of me? Alex asked, his fingers combing gently through her hair. Because of how I feel about you, she corrected. You weren't supposed to matter, Alex. You were supposed to be a means to an end. She propped herself up to look at him directly. Instead, you've become someone I don't want to lose when this is over. The vulnerability in her admission hung between them. Alex reached up to cup her face. Then don't push me away, he said simply. Let me stand with you, not as a pawn in your game or as your rescuer, but as your equal, your partner. Eleanor searched his eyes, looking for any hint of deception or manipulation. The tactics she had grown up with, the strategies she herself had employed. She found only sincerity, and it both terrified and exhilarated her. My father will try to turn you against me, she warned. When he realizes he's losing, he'll become desperate. He'll offer you everything, the company, his connections, wealth, beyond imagination. Alex smiled. I already have everything I want, he said, drawing her down for another kiss. Eleanor allowed herself to believe him, to trust in the possibility of something genuine amidst all the manipulation and strategy. Tomorrow would bring them one step closer to her father's downfall. The day after would see the culmination of 12 years of planning. And after that? For the first time, Eleanor Blackwood found herself looking toward an unplanned future with something other than calculation. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Morning came too quickly. Sunlight streaming through the windows Eleanor had deliberately left uncurtained. She had long ago trained herself to wake with the sun, to maximize every hour of every day, in pursuit of her goals. Today, however, she allowed herself the luxury of lingering in bed, watching Alex sleep beside her. In repose, his face lost the intensity that characterized him in waking hours, revealing a vulnerability that made her heart contract with unexpected tenderness. This was dangerous territory, allowing genuine feelings to complicate her meticulously crafted plans, yet Eleanor couldn't bring herself to regret it. Perhaps this was what her mother had tried to explain in those hidden letters. That true connection was worth the risk of pain, worth fighting for, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. Alex stirred, his eyes opening to find her watching him. Having second thoughts? He asked, his perception uncanny as always. Not about the plan, Eleanor replied honestly. About us and perhaps. He sat up, fully alert now. Explain. You've become important to me, Alex, she said carefully. And in my experience, the things that matter most are the things my father takes away. Understanding dawned in Alex's eyes. You're afraid he'll use me against you. I'm afraid I've given him leverage by caring about you, she corrected. It's the one variable I can't fully control. Alex's laugh surprised her. Eleanor Blackwood, for someone so brilliant, you have a remarkable blind spot. He took her hand. Your father's power comes from isolation, making you believe that he's the only constant, that everyone else will eventually leave or betray you. It's how he's controlled you all these years. Lucide, insight struck Eleanor with the force of revelation. Her father had systematically removed every meaningful connection from her life, her mother, childhood friends, even early romantic interests, until his approval became the only validation that mattered. Until Eleanor herself began maintaining that isolation as a form of protection. By letting me in, Alex continued, you're not creating a vulnerability. You're breaking his most fundamental control mechanism. Eleanor considered this perspective, turning it over in her mind like a complex puzzle. That's remarkably insightful for before coffee, she finally said, a smile tugging at her lips. Alex grinned. I'm not just a pretty face and a revolutionary algorithm, you know. The moment of levity broke the tension, allowing Eleanor to find her equilibrium again. Tonight we face my father, she said, becoming serious once more. Tomorrow everything changes. For the better, Alex assured her, bringing her hand to his lips in a gesture that felt like a promise. Eleanor wished she could share his certainty, but years of her father's manipulation had taught her to prepare for the worst, to anticipate betrayal, to trust no one completely, not even the man who had somehow found his way past her carefully constructed defenses. For the better, she echoed, hoping it wasn't a lie. The Blackwood Financial shareholders' meeting was held in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, a venue Richard had chosen for its old-world opulence, a physical manifestation of the stability and tradition he wanted to project, despite the company's precarious position. Eleanor sat in the front row beside Alex, both of them dressed in battle armor of a different sort, her in a precisely tailored white suit that stood out starkly against the sea of dark business attire, him in a charcoal grey suit that exuded quiet confidence. The previous night's dinner with her father had gone exactly as Eleanor predicted. Richard had made his final pitch to Alex, offering increasingly generous terms for access to his algorithm. When those enticements hadn't produced immediate agreement, he had shifted to veiled threats about regulatory hurdles Hayes Technologies might face without powerful allies. Throughout it all, Eleanor had played her part perfectly, the supportive girlfriend, subtly encouraging Alex to consider her father's offer, all while knowing that in less than 24 hours, Richard Blackwood's empire would begin to crumble. Now, as her father took the podium to address the shareholders, Eleanor felt an unexpected surge of complicated emotions. This man had controlled her life, manipulated her at every turn, used her as a pawn in his games of power. Yet he was still her father, the only parent she had known. There was a moment, brief but undeniable, when she questioned the path she had chosen. Then Richard began to speak, his voice confident as he painted a picture of Blackwood Financial's supposed success, weaving half-truths and outright lies into a narrative of unstoppable growth and innovation. The familiar cold anger returned, strengthening Eleanor's resolve. This was a man who lived by deception, who valued control above all else, even his own daughter's happiness. And today, Richard continued, his smile practiced and perfect, I'm pleased to announce a strategic partnership that will position Blackwood Financial at the forefront of financial technology for decades to come. He gestured toward Alex. Hayes Innovation Technologies will be joining the Blackwood family, bringing their revolutionary predictive algorithm exclusively to our platform. A murmur ran through the audience. This was news to most people present, including Eleanor noted with satisfaction several board members whose expressions revealed their surprise at being bypassed on such a major decision. Alexander Hayes. Richard called, "Would you join me at the podium to share this exciting news?" This was the moment they had prepared for. Alex squeezed Eleanor's hand briefly before rising and making his way to the stage. His face revealed nothing as he shook Richard's hand and turned to face the audience. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Alex began, his voice steady. "It's true that Hayes Technologies has been in discussions with Blackwood Financial about a potential partnership. However," he paused, his eyes finding Eleanor's in the audience, "no agreement has been finalized." Richard's smile faltered slightly, though he maintained his composure. "A mere formality," he interjected smoothly. "The papers will be signed this afternoon." "Actually," a new voice called from the back of the room, "I believe that might be premature." All heads turned to see Victoria Chen striding confidently down the center aisle, her red power suit making her impossible to ignore. Behind her came two men in dark suits, whom Eleanor recognized as SEC officials. Richard's expression hardened as he recognized his longtime rival. "This is a private meeting, Victoria. Security will escort you out." Victoria smiled, a predator sensing weakness. "I'm afraid I have every right to be here, Richard. As of this morning, Phoenix Capital holds 15% of Blackwood Financial's voting shares." She paused for effect. "And I've filed a formal complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding certain irregularities in Blackwood's financial reporting." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Richard's face remained impassive, but Eleanor, who knew him better than anyone, could see the calculation behind his eyes, assessing threats, planning counterattacks, identifying potential sacrificial pawns. "These are baseless accusations," Richard declared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "A transparent attempt by a competitor to manipulate our stock price." "Actually," Alex spoke up, still standing at the podium, "the evidence suggests otherwise." He turned to face Richard directly. The algorithm you've been so eager to acquire. I've already used it to analyze Blackwood Financial's publicly reported data. The discrepancies are significant. Eleanor watched her father's face as the realization dawned. He was being attacked from multiple fronts in a coordinated assault. His eyes scanned the room, finally landing on her. In that moment, she saw comprehension transform his features as the pieces clicked into place. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of warning that she recognized from childhood. "Perhaps you could help clarify this situation for our shareholders." It was an attempt to use their relationship to remind her of her place, not as his adversary, but as his daughter, his creation, his legacy. For a heartbeat, Eleanor felt the pull of that old dynamic, the instinctive desire to please him, to be the perfect daughter he had molded. Then she rose and walked deliberately toward the stage, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. This was the culmination of 12 years of planning, of gathering evidence, of building alliances, of preparing for the moment when she would finally break free from her father's control. "I'd be happy to clarify things, Father," Eleanor said, as she reached the podium, her voice carrying easily through the now silent room. She turned to face the shareholders. For the past 2 years, Blackwood Financial has been systematically falsifying its reports, hiding losses, and misleading both investors and regulators. Richard moved to interrupt, but Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger. "The evidence has been provided to the SEC, along with documentation of tax evasion, illegal fund transfers, and corporate espionage dating back over a decade." She turned to face her father directly. "Blackwood Financial isn't the bastion of stability and integrity that my father has claimed. It's a house of cards built on deception, and today that house falls." The room exploded into chaos. Shareholders shouting questions, reporters who had been covering the meeting frantically making calls, security personnel looking uncertainly between Richard and the SEC officials who were now moving toward the B stage. Through it all, Richard Blackwood stood unnaturally still, his eyes locked on his daughter's. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, meant for her alone. "You ungrateful child. Everything I built was for you. Everything I did was to secure your future." Eleanor shook her head, unflinching under his gaze. "No, Father. Everything you built was for yourself. Your ego, your power, your control. I was just another asset, another tool to be used." She stepped closer. "You arranged my entire life, including my marriage to a man you chose for your business interests. You thought you could control us both." Richard's eyes flickered to Alex, who had moved to stand beside Eleanor. "Hayes," he said, his tone shifting to one Eleanor recognized, the voice he used when offering devastating deals to desperate opponents. "There's still time to choose the winning side. Whatever she's offered you, I can double it. The algorithm. The girl. You can have both, along with a position that would make you untouchable." Alex's laugh was genuine. "Mr. Blackwood, you still don't understand. I was never for sale, and neither was your daughter." He placed his hand on the small of Eleanor's back in a gesture of support. "Although I must thank you for introducing us, it's probably the only selfless thing you've ever done." Richard's composure finally cracked, his face contorting with rage. "You think you've won? You think it's that easy to destroy me?" He turned his fury on Eleanor. "You are nothing without the Blackwood name, without my connections, without my power. You think you can step out of my shadow. Everything you are, I created." Eleanor met his rage with a calm that came from absolute certainty. "No, Father. That's where you're wrong. What you created was a facade, the perfect daughter who existed only to serve your purposes. The real me, the woman capable of bringing down your empire, that's who I created in spite of you, not because of you." Security personnel were approaching now, accompanied by the SEC officials. Richard straightened his tie, his mask of control, slipping back into place even as his world collapsed around him. "This isn't over, Eleanor," he promised, his voice cold. "Actually, it is," she replied with finality. "Goodbye, Father." As Richard Blackwood was escorted from the podium, Eleanor felt a weight lifting. Not just the burden of her 12-year quest for justice, but the heavier weight of a lifetime spent under her father's control. Victoria Chen approached, her expression one of genuine admiration. Beautifully executed, she said. Your father never saw it coming. His own daughter, the one piece on the board he thought he controlled completely. Thank you for your part in this, Eleanor replied. Blackwood Financial is yours now, as agreed. Victoria nodded. And the foundation? Protected, as we discussed. The Blackwood Foundation will continue its work, though perhaps under a new name. Eleanor glanced at Alex. I find myself ready for a fresh start. The next few hours passed in a blur of reporters, questions, official statements, and legal discussions. By late afternoon, the news of Richard Blackwood's arrest and the impending criminal investigation into Blackwood Financial had spread across all major networks. The financial world was in shock, and Eleanor Blackwood, now being hailed as a whistleblower rather than an accomplice, was at the center of the storm. It was nearly midnight when Eleanor finally returned to her Chelsea loft, Alex at her side. They had spent hours with lawyers, with SEC officials, with journalists carefully selected to tell the story as Eleanor wanted it told. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained, yet strangely energized by the sense of completion, of chains finally broken. How does it feel? Alex asked, as they stood looking out at the city lights, the Manhattan skyline glittering, like the empire it was. 12 years of planning and it's finally done. Eleanor considered the question, searching her feelings. Liberating, she said finally, and terrifying. For so long, everything I did was aimed at this day. Taking back control, exposing the truth, breaking free from my father. Now that it's accomplished, she trailed off. Now you have to decide who Eleanor Blackwood really is, Alex finished for her, beyond the perfect daughter, beyond the architect of revenge. Who said anything about revenge? Eleanor asked, with a small smile. I prefer to think of it as justice. Alex studied her face. And was justice served? Your father will likely go to prison. His reputation is destroyed. His empire has fallen. Does it feel as satisfying as you imagined? Eleanor turned to face the city again, considering the complex emotions swirling within her. There was satisfaction, yes, but not the pure, vindictive pleasure she had sometimes imagined in her darkest moments. There was relief, certainly, but also an unexpected undercurrent of sadness, not for her father's fate, which he had earned through his own actions, but for what might have been in a different world with a different kind of father. It feels necessary, she said finally, like lancing a wound that's been festering for years, painful but essential for healing to begin. She turned to face Alex. But there's something else I didn't anticipate. What's that? He asked, moving closer. You, Eleanor said simply. In all my planning, all my calculations, I never expected to find someone who would see the real me. Not the perfect daughter, not the calculating avenger, but just me. Flawed, complicated, not always sure of the right path. Alex reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, an echo of that first intimate gesture on her father's rooftop garden. Perhaps that's the greatest victory, not the fall of Richard Blackwood, but the rise of the real Eleanor. Who happens to be in love with you, she added, the admission feeling both vulnerable and freeing. Another variable I failed to account for in my perfect plan. Alex smiled, drawing her closer. Some variables can't be calculated, Eleanor. Some things defy even the most sophisticated algorithms. He kissed her softly. That's what makes them worth fighting for. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires, to personal victories and defeats. Richard Blackwood had seen New York as his kingdom, a place to be conquered and controlled. Eleanor now saw it differently, as a canvas for possibility, for creation rather than conquest. One battle was over, but a new chapter was just beginning. For the first time in her life, Eleanor faced a future not defined by her father's expectations or by her own quest for liberation from them. It was both exhilarating and daunting, a blank page waiting to be filled. So, Alex asked, his arms still around her, what does the Queen do after checkmate? Eleanor laughed, a sound of genuine joy that echoed through her loft. I have no idea, she admitted, but I'm looking forward to finding out. With you, if you're willing. Partners, remember, Alex reminded her, his eyes holding a promise. In all things, including figuring out what comes next. As they stood together, silhouetted against the backdrop of the city lights, Eleanor felt something she had rarely experienced in her meticulously planned life. The thrill of uncertainty, of possibility, of a future yet to be written. The game with her father was over, but a new one was just beginning. One with different rules, different stakes, and the freedom to choose her own moves. For the first time since she was a child, Eleanor Blackwood faced tomorrow not with calculation, but with hope. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. 6 months later, Eleanor stood on the terrace of a Santorini villa, watching the Mediterranean sunset paint the white buildings in shades of gold and rose. Behind her, she could hear Alex, on a business call, his voice drifting through the open doors as he discussed the launch of their joint venture, a financial literacy platform designed to make sophisticated investment knowledge accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy elite. The Hayes Winters Foundation, she had reclaimed her mother's maiden name after her father's conviction, was thriving, expanding its programs for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds. Eleanor had found purpose in mentoring these girls, teaching them the strategic thinking and resilience that had served her so well, but for constructive ends rather than retribution. Richard Blackwood had been sentenced to 15 years for financial crimes, a substantial fall for a man who had once been among New York's most powerful. Eleanor had not attended the sentencing, had not visited him in prison. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, some wounds wouldn't heal, but she had made peace with that reality in a way that allowed her to move forward rather than remain tethered to the past. Victoria Chen had transformed Blackwood Financial into Phoenix Global, taking the company in new directions that emphasized transparency and ethical practice, partly out of genuine conviction and partly because the scrutiny following Richard's downfall demanded nothing less. She and Eleanor maintained a cordial relationship, occasional allies with a healthy respect for each other's capabilities. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Alex asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Eleanor leaned back against him, savoring the warmth of connection she had denied herself for so long. "I was just thinking about choices," she said, "about how one decision can change everything." "Like your decision to turn against your father?" Alex asked. "Like my decision to trust you," she corrected, turning in his arms to face him, "to let someone in, to risk being vulnerable after a lifetime of walls and strategies." Alex smiled, the ring on his left hand catching the last rays of the setting sun, a match to the one Eleanor wore, their commitment to each other made official in a small ceremony on this very terrace 2 months earlier. "Best risk I ever took," he said, kissing her softly. Eleanor deepened the kiss, still, amazed at how right it felt to let herself love and be loved. The path that had begun with cold calculation had led to genuine connection. The quest for control had ultimately taught her the value of surrender. As night fell over Santorini, Eleanor Blackwood Winters reflected on the strange, winding journey that had brought her here. She had set out to destroy her father's empire, to break free from his control, to claim the power he had wielded over her for so long. In achieving that goal, she had discovered something far more valuable than power or vengeance. She had found herself, and in doing so, had found a love worth more than any empire. The game was over, and Eleanor had won far more than she had ever dared to play for. The end. Dear listeners, we hope you've been captivated by Eleanor's journey from calculated revenge to unexpected love. For more emotionally rich stories that explore the complexities of family, power, and redemption, check out our special playlist by clicking on the link to your left. If Eleanor and Alex's story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Every day we bring you unique narratives that delve into life's most intricate challenges and triumphs.